The gunshot that killed Victoria Gallagher's husband echoed through her memory every night. But it was the silence that followed 3 months later, when her baby stopped breathing in the cradle, that truly shattered her soul into pieces she feared would never mend. She stood now in the spring sunshine of 1878, her hands buried in dishwater at the boarding house in Malad City, Idaho, where she worked 14 hours a day just to keep herself from thinking, from remembering, from feeling anything at all. The mountains rose in the distance beyond the dusty Main Street, their peaks still capped with snow despite the warming air, and she watched them through the kitchen window with eyes that had forgotten how to see beauty. Her dark hair, once carefully pinned and curled, now hung in a simple braid down her back, and her calico dress had been washed so many times the pattern had faded to ghosts of flowers. She was 23 years old and felt ancient. The boarding house belonged to Martha Hendricks, a stout woman with kind eyes who had taken Victoria in when she had nowhere else to go. After her husband, Jacob, died in a shooting outside the saloon, senseless violence over a card game he had not even been part of, Victoria had tried to keep their small homestead going. But the grief had been too much, and then the baby, her sweet Sarah, just 4 months old, had simply stopped breathing one morning. The doctor said sometimes it happened, that there was no explanation, but Victoria knew it was her fault somehow. She must have done something wrong, missed some sign, failed in some fundamental way that mothers were not supposed to fail. She had sold the homestead for barely anything and moved into town, taking the job at the boarding house because she could not bear to be alone in that cabin where everything reminded her of what she had lost. The work was hard, but she welcomed it, the endless cooking and cleaning and changing of linens, because when her body was exhausted, her mind could not wander quite so far into the dark places. Martha never pushed her to talk, never asked prying questions, just gave her work and a small room under the eaves and occasionally patted her shoulder in passing. It was enough, or at least it was all Victoria could manage. The front door opened and Martha called out, "Victoria, we have a new guest. Can you prepare the corner room upstairs?" Victoria dried her hands on her apron and nodded, though Martha could not see her from the kitchen. She gathered fresh linens from the cupboard and climbed the narrow stairs to the second floor, her footsteps soft on the worn wooden boards. The corner room was the nicest in the house, with windows on 2 walls and a view of both the mountains and the main street. They usually reserved it for guests who were staying more than a night or two. She wondered briefly who the new arrival might be, then pushed the thought away. It did not matter. Nothing much mattered anymore. She had just finished making the bed when she heard boots on the stairs, heavy and slow. Martha's voice drifted up, warm and welcoming as always. "I think you will find it comfortable, Mr. Patterson. Meals are included, breakfast at 6, dinner at noon, supper at 6 in the evening. If you need anything, just let me or Victoria know." "Thank you, madam. I appreciate the kindness." The man's voice was deep and rough, like gravel rolling in a creek bed, and there was something in it that made Victoria pause in smoothing the quilt. A heaviness, a weariness that matched her own. She turned as Martha appeared in the doorway with the guest behind her. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, hard build of a man who spent his life working cattle. His hat was in his hands, revealing dark hair that needed cutting, and his face was weathered by sun and wind, lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. Those eyes were a striking pale blue, startling against his tanned skin, and when they met Victoria's, there was a flash of recognition, not of her specifically, but of something in her that he understood. Grief called to grief across the small room. "This is Victoria Gallagher," Martha said. She keeps this place running better than I ever could. Victoria, this is Caleb Patterson. He will be staying with us for a while." Caleb nodded to her, a brief dip of his head. "Madam." "Sir," Victoria replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She had not expected the way her breath caught at the sight of him, at the sorrow she could see etched in every line of his face. She knew that expression. She wore it herself every morning in the small mirror above her wash basin. Martha, oblivious to the strange tension in the room, continued cheerfully. "Mr. Patterson is going to be working at the cattle ranch outside town. He came all the way from Wyoming." "Montana," Caleb corrected gently, "but I have been in Wyoming for a spell." "Well, you are welcome here regardless," Martha said, patting his arm. "I will leave you to settle in. Victoria, can you make sure there is fresh water in the pitcher?" "Yes, madam," Victoria murmured. She moved to take the empty pitcher from the washstand, careful not to brush too close to Caleb in the small space. His presence seemed to fill the room, not in an aggressive way, but simply in the way of a man who was substantial, real, grounded in the world in a way she no longer felt. Martha bustled out and down the stairs, leaving them in awkward silence. Victoria filled the pitcher from the pump in the hallway and returned to find Caleb standing by the window, looking out at the mountains. He had set his saddle bags on the floor and his rifle was propped carefully in the corner, but he had not moved otherwise, just stood there as if he had forgotten what came next. "The view is nice," Victoria offered, not sure why she felt compelled to speak. He glanced at her, and again she saw that flash of understanding. "It is, reminds me of home. Montana." She set the pitcher down and smoothed her apron, a nervous gesture she could not seem to stop. "Yes, had a ranch there with my wife." He paused, and she saw his throat work as he swallowed. "She passed last autumn. Fever took her." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and honest. Victoria found herself saying, before she could stop herself, "My husband died last year, and our daughter 3 months ago." Caleb turned fully to face her then, and in his eyes she saw such raw comprehension that her own filled with tears for the first time in weeks. She had cried herself dry, or so she thought, but something about this stranger's gentle gaze unlocked the tightness in her chest just enough for the grief to seep through again. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "That is a heavy burden for one person to carry." "As is yours," she replied, blinking rapidly to clear her vision. "I should let you rest. If you need anything, I will be downstairs." She fled before he could respond, her footsteps quick on the stairs. In the kitchen, she leaned against the counter and pressed her hands to her face, breathing slowly until the urge to cry passed. What was wrong with her? She had served dozens of guests at the boarding house without falling apart, had maintained her composure through everything, and now a few words from a stranger had her ready to weep like a child. But he was not just any stranger, and she knew it. He was someone who understood, who had walked through the same dark valley she was still stumbling through. That made him dangerous to the careful walls she had built around her heart. The next morning, Victoria was in the kitchen before dawn, starting the fire in the stove and mixing biscuit dough. The routine was so familiar her hands moved without thought, and she let her mind drift in the safe emptiness that had become her refuge. She had the biscuits in the oven and was frying bacon when Martha came down, yawning and tying her apron. "Good morning, dear. Did you sleep well?" Victoria had not slept well in months, but she just nodded and turned back to the stove. The truth was she had lain awake thinking about Caleb Patterson, about the sorrow in his eyes and the way his voice had roughened when he mentioned his wife. She wondered what the woman had been like, whether they had been happy, whether he blamed himself the way she blamed herself for not being able to save the people she loved. The other boarders began filtering down for breakfast. There was old Mr. Chen who ran the laundry, two miners who were working a claim up in the hills, and a salesman passing through on his way to Boise. Caleb was the last to arrive, ducking his head slightly to clear the doorway. He had shaved and changed his shirt, and his hair was still damp from washing, but the shadows under his eyes suggested he had slept as poorly as Victoria had. He took a seat at the far end of the long table and nodded politely to the other men. Martha brought him coffee and he thanked her quietly, wrapping his large hands around the cup as if seeking its warmth. Victoria served the food, setting a plate in front of him with biscuits, bacon, and eggs. He looked up at her and she saw him start to say something, but then he just nodded his thanks and she moved on. After breakfast, the men dispersed to their various occupations and Victoria cleared the table. Caleb lingered, sipping his coffee slowly, and finally he said, "Mrs. Gallagher, I wonder if I might ask you something." She paused in stacking plates, her heart suddenly beating faster. "Yes, Mr. Patterson, is there a church in town? I would like to pay my respects, if you understand my meaning." She did understand. He wanted to visit a cemetery, to feel some connection to the wife he had lost, even though she was buried far away. Victoria felt the same pull every day, the need to go to the small graveyard at the edge of town where Sarah lay in her tiny grave next to Jacob's larger one. "There is a church on the north end of town," she said softly. "The cemetery is just beyond it. I go there sometimes if you would like company for the walk." Something eased in his expression, a tension she had not realized he was carrying. "I would appreciate that if it is not too much trouble." "It is no trouble. I should go this afternoon anyway. I usually go on Sundays." "Today is Sunday," he said, and there was a hint of surprise in his voice as if he had lost track of the days. She almost smiled, though it did not quite reach her lips. "Yes. If you can wait until after I finish the dinner dishes, we could go together." "I can wait," he said, "and I can help with the dishes if you would allow it." Martha, overhearing from the kitchen, laughed. "Well now, Victoria, if you have found a man willing to do dishes, you hold on to him." Victoria felt her cheeks flush and she ducked her head, but Caleb just stood and began gathering the remaining plates. "My wife taught me that a man who cannot clean up after himself is not much of a man," he said simply. "Seems only right to help." So they washed dishes together in silence, Victoria washing and Caleb drying with a towel Martha provided. His movements were careful and deliberate, and he did not try to make conversation, for which Victoria was grateful. There was something peaceful about the simple shared task. The warm water and the clink of plates, and the quiet breathing of another person who understood loss. When they finished, Victoria changed into her Sunday dress, a simple gray cotton that had been her morning dress and had simply remained her dress for everything. She put on her bonnet and met Caleb in the front hall. He had his hat in his hands again, turning it slowly, and when he saw her, he offered his arm. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. His arm was solid beneath her hand, steady and real, and as they walked out into the spring sunshine, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not happiness, not yet, but perhaps the faintest possibility that happiness might someday exist again. They walked slowly through town, past the general store and the saloon and the blacksmith shop, where the clang of hammer on anvil rang out in steady rhythm. A few people nodded to them as they passed, and Victoria was aware of curious glances. She so rarely left the boarding house except to buy supplies that seeing her walking with a man, even just walking to the cemetery, would fuel gossip. But she found she did not care as much as she might have expected. The church was a simple white building with a steeple that pointed toward the blue sky like a prayer. Behind it, the cemetery spread across a gentle slope, marked by wooden crosses and a few proper headstones for those who could afford them. Victoria led Caleb to the far corner where two graves lay side by side, the earth still raw over Sarah's. "My husband Jacob," she said quietly, indicating the larger grave, "and our daughter Sarah." Caleb removed his hat and stood silently for a moment, his head bowed. Then he said, "Would you tell me about them? Only if you want to." Victoria found she did want to, desperately, because no one had asked in so long and she needed to say their names, to make them real again in the speaking. Jacob was a good man, a farmer trying to build something here. He was not perfect, he had a temper sometimes and he drank more than he should, but he loved me and he was excited about the baby. He died before she was born. Someone's bullet went astray in a fight and he was just in the wrong place. Her voice cracked, but she continued. Sarah was born 2 months later. She was perfect, small but healthy, with dark hair like mine and Jacob's brown eyes. I thought, at least I have her, at least I have this piece of him. But then one morning I went to wake her and she was just gone, still and cold and gone. I did not even hear her cry in the night. What kind of mother does not hear her baby cry? The kind who was exhausted and grieving and doing her best, Caleb said firmly. You cannot blame yourself for something you could not control. Can you not? Victoria looked at him, tears streaming down her face now. Do you not blame yourself for your wife? Wonder what you could have done differently? His jaw tightened and he looked away, back at the mountains. Every day. I wonder if I should have taken her to a better doctor, if I should have insisted we go to a city instead of relying on the country physician. I wonder if I kept the house warm enough, if I let her work too hard. I go over every moment and find 1,000 ways I failed her. What was her name? Victoria whispered, Claire Patterson. She was 24 years old and we were married for 3 years. We were happy, or I thought we were. She wanted children, but it had not happened yet, and now it never will. He drew a shaky breath. I sold the ranch because I could not bear to be there without her. Everything reminded me of her laugh, her singing while she cooked, the way she would stand on the porch at sunset and watch the light change. I had to leave or go mad. Victoria understood completely. That is why I left our homestead. I gave it away for almost nothing just to be free of it. They stood together in silence for a while, united in their grief, and slowly Victoria felt something shift inside her. The pain was still there, as sharp as ever, but it was not quite so isolating. Someone else understood. Someone else carried the same weight. That knowledge did not make it lighter, but it made it more bearable somehow. Finally, Caleb said, "Would you like me to say a prayer?" She nodded, not trusting her voice, and he began to speak, simple words about peace and rest and the hope of reunion. His voice was steady despite the emotion Victoria could hear beneath it, and when he finished she whispered, "Thank you." They walked back to the boarding house slowly, neither speaking much, but the silence was comfortable now. When they reached the front steps, Caleb finally said, "I am glad I met you, Mrs. Gallagher. It helps, having someone who understands." "It does," she agreed. "And please call me Victoria. Mrs. Gallagher makes me feel like someone I am not anymore." "Then you must call me Caleb." He hesitated, then added, "Would it be all right if we talked sometimes? I do not mean to impose, but I find I do not want to be alone with my thoughts as much as I have been." "I would like that," Victoria said, and realized with some surprise that she meant it. "I work most of the day, but in the evenings after supper, I usually sit on the back porch for a while before bed. You would be welcome to join me." "I will do that," he promised, and the small smile he gave her was sad but genuine. That evening, after the supper dishes were washed and put away, Victoria took her shawl and went to sit on the back porch as she had said. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, and the air was cooling rapidly the way it did in the high desert. She settled into the old rocking chair Martha kept there and pulled her shawl close, watching the colors shift and change. She had been there perhaps 10 minutes when the door opened and Caleb stepped out. He had a cup of coffee in each hand and he offered her one. "I thought you might like some. Martha said you take it with just a little sugar." "That is very kind, thank you." Victoria accepted the cup, their fingers brushing briefly, and she felt a flutter of something in her chest that was not quite anxiety and not quite pleasure. It had been so long since she had felt anything like it that she barely recognized it. Caleb leaned against the porch railing, looking out at the sunset rather than at her. "This is a beautiful place. Hard country, but beautiful." "It is," she agreed. "Sometimes I forget to see it. I get so caught up in just getting through each day." "I know what you mean. Surviving takes a lot of energy." He sipped his coffee, then said, "I started at the ranch today. It is good work, honest work. The foreman seems like a decent man." "That is Ben Torres, probably. He and his wife Alina have been here for years. Good people." They fell into silence again, but it was not uncomfortable. Victoria rocked slowly, the chair creaking in rhythm with her movement, and allowed herself to simply exist in the moment. The coffee was hot and sweet, the sunset was beautiful, and beside her was someone who did not need her to pretend to be all right. After a while, Caleb said quietly, "I have not talked about Claire to anyone since she died. Her parents were gone already, and I have no siblings. The neighbors came around at first, but then they stopped, and I was alone with it. It felt like she was disappearing, like if I did not speak of her she would be erased completely." "I feel the same about Sarah," Victoria confessed, "and even about Jacob, though we had not been married long. Everyone here knows what happened, but no one mentions it. I think they are trying to be kind to not cause me pain, but the silence makes it worse. Like they never existed at all." "They existed," Caleb said firmly. "They mattered. Their lives mattered even if they were too short." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes again, but they were different this time, cleaner somehow. Yes, yes, they did. Over the following days, a pattern developed. Caleb would leave early for the ranch and return in the evening, dusty and tired, and after supper he and Victoria would sit on the back porch and talk. Sometimes they spoke of the people they had lost, sharing memories and stories. Other times they talked of simpler things, the weather, the town, books they had read, places they had been. Victoria found herself looking forward to those evening conversations, found herself listening during the day for the sound of his boots on the front steps when he returned. Martha noticed, of course. She cornered Victoria in the pantry one afternoon and said with a knowing smile, "Mr. Patterson seems like a good man." "He is," Victoria agreed, measuring flour into a bowl. "He looks at you, you know, when you are not watching." Victoria's hand stilled. "Martha, it is not like that. We are just friends. We both understand what the other is going through." "Hum," Martha said, clearly unconvinced. "And there is nothing wrong with that, dear. You are both young still, both alone. It would be natural for friendship to become something more." "I cannot," Victoria said, her voice tight. "I cannot think about that. It is too soon and I cannot risk, I just cannot." Martha's expression softened and she touched Victoria's arm gently. "I am not pushing you, child. I just want you to know that you are allowed to be happy again. Jacob and your baby would want that for you." Victoria nodded but could not speak around the lump in her throat. She knew Martha meant well, but the thought of opening her heart again, of risking that kind of loss, terrified her. Friendship with Caleb was one thing. They could share their grief and help each other heal, but anything more was unthinkable, except she was thinking about it. She could not seem to help it. She noticed things about him, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, The care with which he treated the boarding house cat that wandered in sometimes. The gentle courtesy he showed to everyone. She noticed the strength in his hands and the breadth of his shoulders. And at night, she sometimes imagined what it would feel like to be held by him, to be safe in someone's arms again. But then the guilt would crash over her, and she would remind herself that she had no right to such thoughts, no right to happiness when her baby and husband were dead. One evening, about 3 weeks after Caleb's arrival, they were sitting on the porch as usual when he said, "I went riding up into the hills today on my day off. There is a valley about 5 miles north, with a creek running through it and cottonwoods along the banks. It reminded me of a place Claire and I used to picnic." "That must have been hard," Victoria said softly. "It was, but in a different way than I expected. I realized that remembering the good times does not hurt quite as much as it did at first. It still aches, but there is sweetness in it too, if that makes sense." "It does," Victoria said slowly. "I have been feeling something similar. I can think about Sarah's little fingers wrapped around mine without completely falling apart now. The grief is still there, but I can hold the joy of having had her at the same time." Caleb turned to look at her directly, and in the fading light his eyes were very blue and very serious. "I think you are one of the strongest people I have ever met, Victoria." She shook her head immediately. "I am not strong. I am just enduring." "Enduring is strength," he insisted. "Getting up every morning when everything in you wants to stay in bed, doing the work, putting one foot in front of the other, that takes tremendous strength. You do not give yourself enough credit." "Neither do you," she replied. "You left everything you knew and started over in a strange place. That takes courage." "Maybe we are both stronger than we think," he said with a small smile. "Or maybe we are just too stubborn to quit." Victoria found herself smiling back. "Maybe both." He held her gaze for a long moment, and Victoria felt something pass between them, a recognition that went deeper than their shared grief. She saw him as a man, not just a fellow mourner, and she could see in his eyes that he saw her as a woman. The realization made her breath catch, and she looked away first, her heart pounding. "It is getting late," she said, her voice not quite steady. "I should go in." "Of course," Caleb said, straightening from the railing. "Thank you for the conversation, as always." "Good night, Caleb." "Good night, Victoria." She fled into the house and up to her small room, closing the door and leaning against it. Her hands were shaking and she pressed them to her chest, feeling her heart race beneath her palms. What was happening to her? She should not be feeling this way, should not be noticing the way Caleb's voice made her feel warm inside, should not be imagining what it would be like to kiss him. But she was feeling it, all of it, and she did not know what to do about it. The next day was Saturday, and the boarding house was always busier on weekends with people coming to town for supplies and staying over. Victoria was rushed off her feet cooking and cleaning, and she barely had time to think, which was perhaps a blessing. She caught only glimpses of Caleb throughout the day, and he seemed to sense she needed space because he did not seek her out. That evening, she was so tired she almost skipped their usual porch time, but something made her go anyway. She needed to see him, needed to hear his voice, even if she did not fully understand why. When she stepped outside, he was already there, leaning on the railing and looking up at the stars that were just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "I was not sure you would come," he said without looking at her. "I was not sure either," she admitted. "It has been a long day." "Too long for company," she considered, then shook her head. "No, your company is never a burden." He turned to her then, and even in the dim light she could see the emotion in his face. "Victoria, I need to say something, and I hope you will forgive me if I am speaking out of turn." Her heart began to pound again. "What is it?" "I care about you," he said simply. "More than I expected to, more than I probably should." I know it has not been long. I know we are both still grieving, but I cannot deny what I feel. You have become important to me, and I needed you to know that." Victoria stared at him, words failing her completely. Part of her wanted to run, to protect herself from the terrifying vulnerability of caring for someone again. But a larger part, a part that had been dormant since Jacob's death, wanted to step closer, to reach for what he was offering. "I care about you too," she finally whispered. "And it frightens me." "It frightens me as well," Caleb admitted. "I thought I would never feel this way again after Claire. I thought that part of my life was over. But then I met you and everything changed." "What if we lose each other too?" Victoria's voice broke on the question. "What if I let myself love you and then you are taken from me? I cannot survive that again, Caleb. I cannot." He crossed to her in 2 long strides and took her hands in his touch gentle but firm. "I cannot promise you that nothing bad will ever happen. Life is uncertain and loss is always possible. But I can promise you that I will do everything in my power to stay alive and healthy and by your side. And I can promise that however long we have together, whether it is 50 years or 5, it will be worth it. Love is always worth it, Victoria, even when it ends in grief." Tears were streaming down her face now, and she could not have stopped them if she tried. "I am so afraid." "I know, so am I, but maybe we can be afraid together." He lifted one hand to cup her cheek, wiping away tears with his thumb. "I am not asking you to decide anything right now. I just needed you to know how I feel. We can take this as slow as you need." Victoria leaned into his touch, closing her eyes and letting herself feel it, really feel it for the first time. The warmth of his palm against her skin, the steadiness of his presence, the comfort of not being alone. When she opened her eyes, he was looking at her with such tenderness that her heart ached. "Can I hug you?" she asked, her voice small. I need to be held for a moment." "Of course," he said, and opened his arms. She stepped into his embrace, and he wrapped her close, one hand at her back and the other cradling her head against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong, and she let herself rest there, let herself be supported, let herself be vulnerable. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the darkness, 2 broken people finding comfort in each other's arms. When they finally pulled apart, Victoria felt lighter somehow, as if sharing the burden had indeed made it less heavy. "Thank you," she said. "Always," he replied, and the promise in that single word made her believe, for the first time, that maybe she could survive loving again. Over the next weeks, they continued their pattern but with a new awareness between them. Caleb did not push for more than Victoria was ready to give, but he made his feelings clear in small ways. He picked wildflowers on his rides and left them in a jar outside her door. He helped with heavy chores without being asked. He saved the choicest pieces of meat for her plate at dinner. And every evening they sat together and talked, sometimes holding hands, sometimes just sitting close enough that their shoulders touched. Victoria found herself coming back to life in small increments. She started to notice the beauty of the world again, the way the light fell through the kitchen window in the morning, the smell of bread baking, the sound of birdsong. She caught herself humming while she worked one day and stopped in surprise, unable to remember the last time she had made music of any kind. Martha noticed the change and smiled but said nothing, for which Victoria was grateful. One Sunday, Victoria and Caleb walked to the cemetery together as they had taken to doing. After they had paid their respects at the graves, Caleb said, "Will you walk with me a little further? I want to show you something." Curious, Victoria agreed, and he led her up into the hills beyond the town. They walked for perhaps 20 minutes, climbing a gradual slope, and then crested a rise, and Victoria gasped. Below them lay the valley Caleb had mentioned, a sweep of green bisected by a silver ribbon of creek, cottonwoods rustling in the breeze. It was beautiful and peaceful, a hidden sanctuary. "I thought you might like to see it," Caleb said, watching her face. "It seems like a place for healing." They sat down on the hillside, the grass soft beneath them, and looked out over the valley. Victoria felt something ease in her chest, some tightness she had been carrying for so long she had forgotten it was there. "It is perfect," she said. "I have been thinking," Caleb said slowly, "about the future, about what I want my life to look like. And I realized that I do not want to just survive anymore. I want to live. I want to build something again, have a home, maybe a family someday. I want all the things I thought I had lost forever." "I want that too," Victoria admitted, "but I am still afraid. What if we face the fear together?" He turned to her, taking her hand. "I am not asking you to marry me, not yet, not until you are ready, but I am asking if you would consider it someday. If you would consider building a future with me." Victoria looked at their joined hands, his so much larger than hers, calloused from work but gentle in their hold. She thought about the life she had imagined with Jacob, the one that had been stolen from them. She thought about Sarah, about the desperate love she had felt for that tiny person and the devastating loss when she was gone. And then she thought about Caleb, about how he had appeared when she needed him most, about how he understood her grief and her fear and her hope in ways no one else could. "Yes," she said quietly. "Not yet, but someday. I would like that very much." The smile that broke across his face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds, and he lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "You have made me the happiest man in Idaho, Victoria Gallagher." She laughed, the sound surprising her, and realized it was the first time she had truly laughed since Sarah died. "That is a low bar, Caleb Patterson. There are not that many men in Idaho." He laughed too, and the sound was wonderful, rich and deep and full of genuine joy. "Well then, the happiest man in the whole West." "Will that do?" "It will do nicely," she said, and leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling content in a way she had thought impossible. They sat there for hours, talking and dreaming and planning. And when they finally walked back to town, hand in hand, Victoria felt like she was stepping into a new life. The past would always be part of her. Jacob and Sarah would always hold a piece of her heart, but she was learning that the heart could expand, could make room for new love without diminishing the old. That night, as she lay in bed, Victoria allowed herself to imagine the future for the first time. She saw a house, not grand but comfortable, with a porch where she could watch the sunset. She saw Caleb coming home from work, kissing her cheek, asking about her day. She saw children, not as replacements for Sarah, but as new blessings, new chances at the joy of motherhood. She saw growing old together, supporting each other through whatever trials came, facing life as a team. It was a beautiful vision, and for the first time she believed it might actually come true. The summer passed in a blur of work and courtship, chaste but deepening. Caleb was patient, never pushing Victoria further than she was comfortable going, but making his devotion clear in 1,000 small ways. He started attending church with her on Sundays, sitting beside her in the pew, and singing the hymns in a pleasant baritone. He walked her to the general store when she needed supplies, carrying her parcels and making her laugh with stories about the ranch. The other townspeople began to notice, and Victoria was aware of the talk. Some people thought it was too soon for her to be keeping company with a man. Others were happy for her, glad to see her emerging from her grief. She tried not to care either way, focusing instead on her own feelings and Caleb's. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch watching heat lightning flicker on the horizon, Caleb said, "I have been saving my wages. I have almost enough to put a down payment on some land. There is a parcel for sale about 2 miles from town, good water and grazing. I was thinking I could start my own small ranch, build it up slowly. Victoria's heart beat faster. That sounds like a wonderful plan. I was hoping, he continued, his voice careful, that you might have some thoughts on what kind of house should be built there. If you were going to live in it, what would you want? She turned to look at him, and in his eyes she saw hope and love and a question he was not quite asking directly. I would want it to be big enough for a family, she said slowly, with a good kitchen and a bedroom downstairs for when we are old and cannot manage stairs, and a porch, definitely a porch facing the mountains. That sounds perfect, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Victoria, I know we said we would wait, but I cannot imagine my future without you in it. I love you. I have loved you almost from the first moment I saw you, when I recognized my own grief reflected in your eyes. You have brought me back to life, given me a reason to hope again. Would you marry me? Would you be my wife and let me spend the rest of my life making you happy? Victoria felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but they were happy tears this time, tears of joy and relief and love. Yes, she said. Yes, Caleb, I will marry you. I love you too, so much it frightens me, but I choose to be brave. I choose to believe in our future together. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her for the first time, his lips gentle and reverent against hers. It was nothing like the passionate kisses she had shared with Jacob in the early days of their marriage. This was deeper, richer, tempered by loss and made more precious by the knowledge of how fragile happiness could be. When they pulled apart, both were crying and laughing at the same time. When? Victoria asked. When should we marry? Whenever you want, Caleb said. Tomorrow, next month, next year. I am yours for as long as you will have me. The fall, Victoria decided. September, when the heat breaks and the aspens turn gold. That will give you time to buy the land and start building, and give me time to prepare properly. September it is, he agreed, and kissed her again. They told Martha the next morning, and she cried and hugged them both and immediately began planning. We will have the ceremony at the church, of course, and the reception can be here at the boarding house. I will make the cake, and we can invite the whole town. Oh, this is wonderful, just wonderful. Victoria laughed at her enthusiasm, feeling lighter and happier than she had in over a year. The grief was still there, it would always be there, but it no longer defined her entire existence. She could hold her sorrow for Jacob and Sarah alongside her love for Caleb, could honor the past while embracing the future. Caleb bought the land the following week and began working on the house in his spare time with help from the ranch hands and some of the townsmen. Victoria would ride out on Sunday afternoons to see the progress, watching the structure rise from the ground like a promise taking shape. It was a simple house, but well built and solid, with the big kitchen she wanted and the porch facing the mountains. As the wedding approached, Victoria made herself a new dress, a soft blue that brought out her eyes. It was not white, she was a widow after all, but it was not the somber gray she had been wearing either. It felt like a good compromise, acknowledging her past while celebrating her future. The night before the wedding, Victoria visited the cemetery alone. She knelt between the two graves and spoke softly to the people buried there. I hope you understand, she said to Jacob. I loved you, and I will always be grateful for the time we had. And Sarah, my sweet baby, Mama will never forget you. But I have a chance to be happy again, and I am going to take it. I think you would both want that for me. The wind rustled through the grass, and a sense of peace settled over Victoria. She placed wildflowers on both graves and walked back to town with a light heart. The wedding was simple but beautiful. The whole town turned out, filling the little church to capacity. Victoria walked down the aisle on Martha's arm, since she had no father or brother to give her away. and when she reached the front and saw Caleb waiting for her, his eyes shining with love, she knew she was making the right choice. They spoke their vows clearly and firmly, promising to love and cherish each other for better or worse in sickness and health, until death parted them. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed her tenderly, and the congregation burst into applause. The reception at the boarding house was lively and joyful. There was music and dancing, food and drink, and countless well wishes from their neighbors. Victoria danced with Caleb, laughing as he spun her around the cleared parlor, and for the first time in so long she felt truly, completely happy. As the evening wound down and the guests began to depart, Caleb took Victoria's hand and led her outside to where his horse was waiting. "Are you ready to see your new home, Mrs. Patterson?" "I am ready, Mr. Patterson," she said, loving the sound of her new name. They rode together through the twilight, Victoria sitting side saddle in front of Caleb, his arms around her keeping her safe. When they reached the house, he helped her down and then, to her surprise, swept her up into his arms and carried her over the threshold. "Tradition," he said with a grin, setting her down gently in the front room. Victoria looked around in wonder. The house was small but cozy, furnished with simple pieces Caleb had built himself. There was a fire crackling in the fireplace and candles lit on the mantel and flowers in a jar on the kitchen table. It was perfect. "Welcome home," Caleb said softly. "Home," Victoria repeated, and the word felt right in a way it had not for so long. "Yes, this is home." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, a gentle exploration and joining of two people who had learned the hard way how precious love was. They took their time, murmuring words of love and devotion, and afterward they lay tangled together, Victoria's head on Caleb's chest, listening to his heartbeat and feeling utterly content. "Are you happy?" Caleb asked, his hand stroking her hair. "I am," Victoria said, surprised to find it completely true. "I did not think I would ever be happy again, but I am." "So am I," he said. "You have given me my life back, Victoria. I will spend the rest of my days trying to deserve you." "You already do," she assured him, and kissed him until he stopped talking and just held her close. The next months passed in a blur of newlywed happiness. Caleb worked hard at building up his small ranch, buying a few head of cattle and working to improve the land. Victoria kept house and helped Martha at the boarding house a few days a week, not for the money anymore, but because she enjoyed the work and the company. They fell into an easy partnership, supporting each other in all things. When winter came, they spent the long evenings by the fire, reading together or playing cards or simply talking. Victoria taught Caleb to knit, and he was surprisingly good at it, his large hands managing the needles with unexpected grace. He taught her to play chess, and they had long, competitive games that often ended in laughter. It was during one of those quiet winter evenings that Victoria realized her monthly courses were late. She said nothing at first, afraid to hope, but when another week passed, she could no longer deny it. She was pregnant. The realization brought a flood of emotions, joy and terror in equal measure. She wanted a child desperately, wanted to be a mother again, but the memory of losing Sarah was still so raw. What if something went wrong again? What if she lost this baby too? She must have looked pale because Caleb set down his book and crossed to where she sat. "Victoria, what is wrong?" "I think," she said slowly, "I think I am going to have a baby." His face went through a series of expressions, shock and joy and fear, and then settled on something that looked like determination. "That is wonderful news. Terrifying but wonderful." "What if I lose this one too?" Victoria whispered, voicing her deepest fear. Caleb knelt in front of her and took her hands. We will do everything possible to make sure you and the baby are healthy. We will get the best doctor. You will rest as much as you need. I will take care of everything. But Victoria, you cannot live in fear of what might happen. We have to have faith that this time will be different. I want to believe that, she said, tears streaming down her face. Then believe it, he said firmly. Believe that we will have a healthy baby, that our family will grow, that good things can happen to us. We deserve happiness, Victoria. We have been through enough pain. She nodded, letting his confidence bolster her own wavering faith. All right, I will try. That is all I ask, he said, and kissed her gently. We will face this together, whatever comes. The pregnancy progressed normally, to Victoria's intense relief. She felt sick in the mornings and tired in the afternoons, but the doctor assured her these were good signs, signs of a healthy pregnancy. Caleb hovered anxiously, constantly checking on her, bringing her tea and cushions and whatever she needed. Victoria found his attention both touching and slightly exasperating, but she loved him all the more for it. As her belly swelled with the growing baby, Victoria allowed herself to hope. She knitted tiny clothes and Caleb built a cradle, and they talked late into the night about names and futures and all the things they would teach their child. The specter of Sarah's death was always there, but it grew smaller as the months passed, and the pregnancy continued without incident. Spring came again, the mountains shedding their snow and the valleys turning green. Victoria's time drew near, and Caleb arranged for the doctor to be on call, ready to come at a moment's notice. Martha came to stay with them as Victoria's due date approached, ready to help with the birth and the household. The pain started on a beautiful May morning, and Victoria labored all through the day and into the night. It was hard and exhausting and terrifying, but Caleb was there the whole time, holding her hand and encouraging her, and Martha was there with cool cloths and soothing words. And finally, as the sun rose on a new day, Victoria gave birth to a healthy, squalling baby boy. When the doctor placed the baby in her arms, Victoria felt something inside her heel, some broken place that she had thought would never mend. This was not Sarah, would never replace Sarah, but this was a new life, a new chance, a new beginning. She looked at Caleb, who was crying openly, and saw her own joy and relief reflected in his face. He is perfect, Caleb said, his voice choked. Victoria, he is perfect. He is, she agreed, unable to look away from the tiny face. What should we name him? They had discussed this at length, and Caleb said, I was thinking, if you agree, we could name him Jacob, after your first husband. He should be remembered too. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. And his middle name could be Samuel, after your father. Jacob Samuel Patterson. Jacob Samuel Patterson, Caleb repeated and smiled. I like it. Welcome to the world, Jacob. The baby's arrival brought such joy into their lives that Victoria could hardly believe it. She had been so afraid, so convinced that she would lose this child too. But here he was, healthy and strong and utterly beloved. Caleb was a devoted father, helping with everything from diaper changes to night feedings, and Victoria fell in love with him all over again, seeing him cradle their son. The summer passed in a haze of sleepless nights and endless wonder. Victoria had forgotten, or perhaps had never fully known with Sarah's short life, how amazing it was to watch a baby grow and change. Every day Jacob did something new, and every day she and Caleb marveled over him together. One evening, when Jacob was about 3 months old, Victoria and Caleb sat on the porch as they had done so many times before. The baby was asleep in his cradle inside, and they could hear him breathing softly through the open window. Victoria leaned against Caleb's shoulder and said, I have been thinking about Sarah a lot lately. I thought you might be, Caleb said gently. Does it make you sad? Yes, but not the way it used to. I am sad that she did not get to live, that I did not get to watch her grow up the way I am watching Jacob grow. But I am also grateful that I had her, even for such a short time. She taught me how to be a mother, and she will always be my daughter, my firstborn. Jacob does not replace her. He is just adding to our family. That is a good way to think about it, Caleb said. And Claire taught me how to love, how to be a husband. I carry her with me too, and I am grateful for the time we had. But you and Jacob are my present and my future, and I am grateful for that too. Victoria tilted her face up and kissed him. We have built something good here, have we not? Out of all our pain and loss, we found each other and built something good. We have, he agreed, and we will keep building. More children if we are blessed, a thriving ranch, a long life together. All of it? I love you, Caleb Patterson, Victoria said. I love you too, Victoria Patterson, he replied. More than I can ever say. They sat together in the gathering dusk, listening to their son breathe and feeling the peace of a hard-won happiness. The grief would always be part of them, the memories of Jacob and Sarah and Claire woven into the fabric of their lives. But they had learned that grief and joy could coexist, that loss did not preclude love, that broken hearts could heal and love again. 2 years later, Victoria gave birth to a daughter, whom they named Claire Sarah, honoring both Caleb's first wife and Victoria's first daughter. The little girl had Victoria's dark hair and Caleb's blue eyes, and her brother Jacob adored her from the moment he met her. The house rang with laughter and the sound of children playing, and the ranch prospered under Caleb's careful management. When Victoria was 28, she gave birth to twins, 2 more boys who kept everyone exhausted and delighted in equal measure. They named them Thomas and William, and the house that had once seemed so big now felt perfectly full. Caleb built an addition, adding more bedrooms and a larger kitchen, and Victoria hired a girl from town to help with the housework and the children. The years passed in the way of happy families, with small dramas and large joys, with hard work and deep satisfaction. Victoria and Caleb grew older together, their love deepening with time and trial. They supported each other through everything: the lean years when the cattle prices dropped, the hard winters when they worried about feed, the illnesses that struck the children but thankfully never seriously. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Caleb took Victoria back to the valley, where he had first told her he loved her. They rode together as they had that first time, though now they both had more gray in their hair and lines around their eyes. They sat on the hillside and looked out over the green expanse, the creek still running silver through it. You remember when we came here before? Caleb asked. Of course, Victoria said. You asked me to consider marrying you. Best decision I ever made, he said. Well, second best. The best was coming to Malad City in the first place. If I had gone anywhere else, I never would have met you. I think we were meant to find each other, Victoria said thoughtfully. 2 broken people who needed each other to heal. I do not believe it was chance. Neither do I, Caleb agreed. He pulled her close and kissed her, and she melted into him the way she always did, the spark between them as strong as ever. Here is to 10 more years, and 10 after that, and 10 after that. Until we are old and gray and cannot remember our own names, Victoria said with a laugh. I will always remember your name, Caleb promised. Victoria Patterson, the love of my life, the mother of my children, my partner in all things. How could I ever forget? They stayed there for hours, talking and dreaming as they always had. And when they rode home, the house was full of their children's voices, full of life and love and all the things they had thought they lost forever. Victoria lived to see all her children grow to adulthood and have families of their own. Jacob became a rancher like his father, taking over the family spread and expanding it. Claire Sarah married a schoolteacher and moved to Boise, where she raised 4 children and taught them all to read before they started school. The twins went into business together, starting a freight company that served the entire southern Idaho territory. When Victoria was 62, Caleb fell ill with pneumonia. She nursed him through it, sitting by his bedside day and night, refusing to leave him. He pulled through to everyone's relief, but he was never quite as strong afterward. They sold the ranch to Jacob and moved into a small house in town, where Victoria could be closer to the doctor and Caleb would not have to work so hard. They spent their final years in quiet contentment, surrounded by children and grandchildren, telling stories of the old days and watching the world change around them. The Wild West was becoming tamer, the territories becoming states, the frontier being settled and civilized. But Victoria and Caleb had their memories, their love, and each other, and that was enough. Caleb died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 74, with Victoria holding his hand. She grieved him deeply, but without the shattering despair she had felt when Jacob died. This grief was softer, tempered by gratitude for the many years they had shared and the certainty that she would see him again someday. She wore black for a year, as was proper, but she did not withdraw from life the way she had before. Her children and grandchildren needed her, and she had learned long ago that life was for living, not hiding from. Victoria lived another 8 years, dying quietly at the age of 73, surrounded by her family. In her final moments, she thought she saw Caleb waiting for her, young and strong as he had been when they met, and beside him were Jacob and Sarah and Claire, all smiling and welcoming her home. She closed her eyes with a smile on her face and slipped away peacefully, ready to join the people she had loved in whatever came next. She was buried in the cemetery in Malad City, between Caleb on one side and the graves of her first husband and daughter on the other. The headstone reads simply, "Victoria Patterson, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother." But those who knew her story understood that those simple words encompassed a life of profound loss, and even more profound love, a life that had been broken and healed, a life that had found joy again after unimaginable sorrow. She and Caleb had proven that grief did not have to be the end, that broken people could heal together, that love could bloom again, even in the hardest soil. Their legacy lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch that still bore the Patterson name, in the stories told around dinner tables about the widow and the cowboy who found each other when they both needed healing most. And in the valley, 5 miles north of Malad City, where the creek ran silver and the cottonwoods rustled in the breeze, their spirits sometimes seemed to walk together, hand in hand, forever young and forever in love, a testament to the enduring power of hope and healing and the human heart's infinite capacity to love again.